Hello, everybody. We have Matthew Whittaker in London today. Matthew is my friend who I studied with at the London Metropolitan University. Matt studied in Glasgow University as well before coming to London. And now he runs his own practice in Whittaker Parsons with lovely person called Camilla Parsons. Matthew used to work for Caruso St. John, Jamie Forbert, and also Iroje in South Korea. So he has a various projects he has worked with and in different environments. It's going to be very interesting, and it's very important to listen to his projects and talk today because especially, our research theme and area is very domestic spaces at this semester, and he has numbers of projects in that sort of context. So I'm really looking forward to his talk, and I'm quite 200% sure that he'll be helpful to your research and design. Great. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. It's lovely to hear and great to be with you guys. So I'll share screen and we'll get going. So yeah, it's I hope that this talk will in part be an introduction to our practice in East London and also an introduction to London and parts of London which maybe you don't know, or maybe some of you will know a bit better than others. And part of the histories and pressures that have shaped and continue to shape London, and how the recent pandemic forms that latest layer to the history of our city and everyone's city, and also our domestic spaces and our homes and how we live in them. As Minson mentioned, we're an emerging practice based in London, founded by Camilla Parsons, who's also my wife, and myself. And the project the studio takes on
slower. I think you can slow down a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try. The studio's projects are hugely varied, from small-scale domestic extensions to interventions to high-end retail and art. So just before we start talking about some of the domestic projects, I thought it would be nice to introduce you to some of the other projects we do. This was a project at the Venice Art Biennale with the artist and potter Edmund Duval, which was a temporary library that then traveled to several other galleries across Europe, ending in the British Museum. This was a project that we collaborated with Gentle Monster on, a brand I'm sure you're quite familiar with, in central London, their European flagship store. And this was another project that we did as a marble pavilion, again with the potter Edmund Duval. And here we are based in East London. And while the projects are quite varied, they're all, well, we like to think they're all connected to a consistent methodology, which involves looking rigorously at context and finding ways to respond directly to it. Our intention is always to create projects that are bespoke and unique to their place. And since our inception, our studio has amassed a range of projects which seek to adapt and extend the modest terraced house, which characterizes much of London and subsequently a lot of other UK cities. The terraced house is the most common type of house in Britain. The ordinary house built rapidly, economically, and to standardized designs. And its origin is from London, where a catastrophic event in 1666, the Great Fire of London, which completely changed the approach to building and domestic properties. Prior to this, London had been a disorganized mass of ramshackled properties, which only helped fuel the fire and make it very difficult to put out, burning for years. And the scale of the destruction caused forced authorities to clearly set out how the city would be rebuilt to avoid something like this happening again, which ultimately gave birth to the terraced house, which ensured that walls were made of brick or stone, roofs of tiles, and party walls built so that fire could not spread from one property to another. The terrace has seen multiple changes since its birth, notably Public Health Act, which meant that they had to achieve a space standard, and it was the first time that they had amenities such as running water, and this was in 1890, and then it was only until the 1960s, 70s where properties were actually fitted with indoor toilets and bathrooms. And then this is a drawing that we did as part of an exhibition that was put on in Glasgow in the summer of 2019, titled Adaptation Street, which collated the range of projects that we'd worked on Terrace House to demonstrate our research into the Terrace House and its adaptability. It's a key word for this presentation. The house developed over time, and it's evolved with many different styles. There were distinctions between sizes and types depending on where, when, and whom they were built for. The widths, so I should highlight that the party wall line is this. So these are the solid wall lines that define each property, and this is a key attribute to the terrace house. And the width of the terrace house is the key variant. Some range from start at about 3.8 meters wide, which is very narrow, and the more grander terrace houses go beyond 6 meters wide. And a lot of these distinctions of size and types were who they were built for and where. Obviously, it's all about the economics of building. And it's been fascinating to see how the terrace house has evolved over 200 years and changes in domestic life that have brought changes to the plan. For us, the craft of altering these buildings is both analytical understanding of the existing and an intuitive response to what's required. Our projects seek to strive to strike a careful balance between conservation and intervention. And for us, the key word intervention is it's a balancing act of change that enables the existing to remain occupied and significant while maintaining and enriching the existing and giving the entire property and a renewed sense of purpose. What has made, I think the key questions for us at this point are, what has made this type of housing so resilient to change? What are the attributes of the terrace house that has allowed it to adapt, and how it performed during the pandemic? And how can they be adapted to suit 21st century life and a post-pandemic world? And now I'm hoping to use our projects to demonstrate how we have sought to adapt them, and how through their very simple construction, they allow adaptation. So these are some of the drawings, and this was the book that they were published in. And then the first is probably the grandest terrace that we've worked on. This is relatively central London, just north of King's Cross, if you know it, in Camden. Now, the key thing about this is that it is a width of 5.2 meters. So it's the grandest, so it's the widest as well. It would have been originally, so this is the one we're talking about, but you can see the whole terrace has been designed so it reads as one building, which was the origin of the terrace house. It was kind of that big manor. And the key thing to know about the section is the roof has been converted, which often happens, but it's a 3-story original. And the ground floor is accessed up to a flight of steps. So this would be the principal space, and the basement or lower ground would have been for the staff members. So the project actually consisted of making this one home for a family of 4, and how that home was able to grow and contract depending on who was in the property and how they were living together, and also improving that access to the garden space. So this is the existing entrance to the upper ground floor. As you come up a flight of steps, traditionally you always have 2 principal living rooms, which this has subsequently been developed into a kitchen. This is existing, and then downstairs you have when we started the project was a ground floor flat, so there was no connection between the 2. So the main move and this is the rear. Often what happens at the rear is the front elevation is the thing that is kind of protected and very formal, and the rear ends up being quite ramshackled and additive. So often the move to make is how to make sense of this rear. And the first move was to create a physical connection from the formal upper ground floor to the new lower ground floor, to return this to a living space and relocate the kitchen to the new lower ground floor. And I think all our designs have always sought to create definition between spaces, not create large spaces for multiple activities. And this is a case in point where, while this allows this entire floor plan to be open, in one instance there is a sliding screen here which allows the flexibility being keyed in how the terrace house can operate and remain significant. This room then becomes a spare bedroom, or more often a playroom for their young children, so they can then have this space as a dining room. And then you can see then as the section, the main building part, the projects always consist of how to intervene in the existing building, and then how can that building be extended to create more usable, more newer floor area. And then we often in the studio work through models to kind of test ideas and also to communicate them to the clients. So the existing walls here were retained, and effectively we were rebuilding within those existing walls and recreating terraces. And so the materials that we use, I think one of the things that's made the terrace houses life so long is that they are built in a very, very simple, low-tech construction out of brickwork, solid brickwork with timber floors. And often when we try and engage in the construction, we are actually looking to extend that direct form of construction, often building brickwork to tie in with the existing, both contextually, but also as a material fabric. Now, the issues that brings is ultimately the buildings require a level of thermal upgrade to meet modern standards. So that's also part of the big test now, is to how do we, huge amount of people live in terrace houses across Britain. How do we upgrade them thermally to meet modern heating requirements? And this is the new ground floor plan, the new sort of part of the house effectively. And this was a reworking of these two spaces to create a downstairs shower room, the new kitchen where the stair would sit. And then this is our new flexible dining garden room space. We were testing a series of different floors through these models, and in the end it ended up being a timber floor, which felt the same as the timber floor upstairs. So the two is always about connecting the two and making the two feel as cohesive as a project as possible, rather than kind of creating a clear definition between the two. And then we also, because of what I should have said, is the section is quite key to this project because of the sloping side. So the front, you either step down or step up, but then the garden is actually quite a lot higher than the ground floor of this lower basement, which always gives peculiarities to it, because effectively what the terrace house is a complete standard design, pattern book design, that is then extrapolated or placed on different sites which have different orientations and contexts. So it's always interesting to see how those standardized designs deform to meet their site, and often they don't, they just kind of get plonked in it. And it's our job now to come in and actually tease out what's important and how the projects can become more specific to deal with their orientation and things like access to garden. So we took down all of the rear garden structures. We lowered the floor of this space so it was consistent with the rest, and also lowered part of the garden so it terraced down, so it kind of created a more seamless connection. This is the existing ground floor. Obviously we've stripped out some of it, but you can see it's incredibly basic: brick walls, timber roofs. The steels are ours because we're looking to create bigger spans. And then this is looking back towards the street from that ground floor. Not particularly appealing at the moment. Hopefully it improves. And then the similar view. So this is now looking back towards that same view, but slightly further into the house. So this is the new kitchen space. And this critically is this flexible playroom, bedroom space. And it's been fascinating to speak to clients as they've been living and working at home over the last year. The client for this house is a journalist who works for the BBC and the Times, and his wife works for the World Health Organization. So they're both very busy people with 2 children, and having this vertical separation between the houses enabled them to kind of help themselves kind of separate from family life, but also create acoustic buffers for a young family, and designated spaces to work. And one of the things that's always, how do you create a vertical stratification in a home, but still allow visual connections to make it feel as one home, to kind of make it feel as one volume. That's something that's starting to run, you'll see in the next project as well. And this is then the playroom with a big blackboard sliding screen, which looks back towards the garden. And then this is the new garden space that slowly steps up to feel like it's as connected as it possibly can be, with a new roof light above. And then this is the space upstairs that used to be the kitchen, which is now a sort of a study TV space. And actually the client has set up a desk in here now, and just uses it as his home office for the time being. So it's kind of been, because he's had that extent of space, he's afforded him the luxury. This then opens directly onto this terrace with the roof light to the dining space below. And that is that one. So very, very differently, in a different part of London, over in East London, towards the Olympic Park, where homes were built much quicker, much quicker, much later. So that we're now in the Victorian era, and they were built predominantly for workers. So whereas in the previous property you saw was much grander, this project is only 4.3 meters wide, and much more compact as a result. So it's this one here. Now, the big change that we were able to do here is to create a new roof extension, but it's all one flat site, which is quite rare. So this is a very, very standard type where you would have the 2 formal reception rooms and then a kitchen or scullery at the back. And the client had previously put in a new bathroom upstairs. So that's kind of the existing condition. It's all brick, it's all timber floors, it's all very familiar. This is the section. Interestingly, some of these have basements which are great for storage, and they used to be about coal delivery for fire, wood burning stoves and things like that. So what we sought to do was to create a new kitchen dining space at the back, upgrade thermally internally, and then create this new bedroom floor upstairs. And through doing that, we also trying to create visual connections from floor to floor. And this is the new extension to the roof. And the material choices that we started to bring in this project were much more sustainably driven. So we're looking to use very robust materials. This is a little model to sort of explain exactly what we're keeping and what we're putting in new. So where we're retaining heavy mass above, we're expressing steel work, and where we're sort of placing a timber frame within the existing party walls. Looking at a palette of materials which reference the existing in its construction and really expressed it, but also exposing the new construction that we were bringing to the project, and using sustainable finishing materials. So a cork floor for upstairs, and the kitchen is made out of bamboo joinery, as is the upstairs joinery. So we'll see that shortly. Now, what's interesting about this scheme is it has such a small garden, and I think what the Terrace House has going for it over a lot of other much denser schemes is they all have a small provision of outdoor space. Some have larger, some have smaller. They all have their own front door, which has served really well during a pandemic where people are incredibly sort of cautious, rightly so, about coming into contact with people that they're not that familiar with. And the issue with the small garden is it's just not very usable. So what we try to do is dissolve the back of the house, so it could feel that when the doors are open, the garden and the house are really blurred. in the lines, and you can see that the very little, we're trying to keep what the new construction is as lean as possible. It's just the exposed steel work that holds up the existing outrigger, and then this is built out of brickwork to match the existing, and then all of the other materials are effectively the bamboo joinery with a new concrete floor. But the bamboo joinery, and I think the bamboo joinery is key for us because not only is it a sustainable material, it's also incredibly robust. I think homes take a huge battering over their life. The requirements that they get put on with their children, their family members, all sorts. And then this was instead of hiding this new brick wall, we used glazed brick with a painted red steel shelf that tied into the shelves above. So it all felt very kind of consistent. We extended that robustness to how we actually treated the plumbing, and just got the plumber to make taps out of bent copper pipes. And that's something that goes upstairs as well. What's nice about the bamboo as well is trying to express its construction. So when we create the routed handles, you're actually revealing its core of it. And then again, it's a bit like the project that I just showed you of how do you create a new part of a house that's got a very rich context, but the new part feels new, but also feels that doesn't jar with the existing. So we created a new stair, which effectively is an interpretation of this stair, and we pulled it away from the wall, so it allowed as much natural light to come down, and again visual connections in here. So the stair becomes a real orientator for you as you move through the house. And there we go, using the same materials but using them differently, I think is often something that pops up. And then upstairs we have the new master bedroom, which again is a cork floor with some bamboo joinery, and just looking to maximize the volumes as possible. And the bathroom, again, taking through those details that we developed downstairs, making it as consistent as possible, with the new shower and all of those controls. And that's the new extension. So often with our projects, there's an element where you have to be quite conservative and referential. Part of the UK planning system is that if you're seeing it in a conservation area, which is a slightly more protected area, then what you have to do externally is be very respectful of that context. But internally, it gives you options to create much larger spaces or new vertical connections through the property, and things like that. And then this one is a small project that we did in South London, which is, again, this is a slightly wider terrace house, 5.2 meters wide. And the key thing about this is this was built in the suburbs. So that's why the spaces are a bit grander, because people expected that, because they're not as densely packed, it's not as central. So this is a place called Dulwich. And down here, it was, again, two very grand existing living rooms, but a very, very poor kitchen and strange shower room at the back. And this site steps. So there's no connection to the garden at the moment because it's much, much lower. So the key thing to solve there was, how do you create, as you can see, you sort of come in, step down, and then you step down again, and then this currently slopes quite steeply down. So how do you create a project which has a kitchen and a dining space that's quite flexible, but also feels that it can connect to the garden? And a key thing, just as the original terrace houses, a key driver for all of these projects is how do you build in an affordable way? Our clients don't have, unfortunately, sometimes don't have endless pockets of money. So it's actually being as pragmatic about how do you change the property, both to make the client's money go as far as possible, but also to sort of make sure that you're still keeping the essence of the original home. So we built a small side extension, and again, this was to keep the build cost down, but we retained as much of the massing externally and just upgraded it and extended it, which you'll see. So we created a new, very generous kitchen, dining space, and then terracing down into the garden. And this was the drawing we did, which explored that idea of what brick we could retain, what brick could we cut away to create new openings, and then what brick we would add to it, and how how distinct those differences could and should be between the two. So this is us on site, where we're starting to see and actually realizing that the line between the two, we deliberately chose a brick that was quite similar. So the line between the two didn't jar, but it was still evident, it was still there, still visible. And the key thing about this was actually just having some large windows that could open. And then the terrace, which unfortunately isn't planted in here, but I'm told it's looking lovely now. And then the two new roofs were expressed in these timber paneling, which relates to a traditional timber paneling of English homes before plasterboard and paint decoration became so wide placed. And then it is, so this is that new part of the building that's been built, and then this is the new garden dining room space. And what's been interesting about this is again, a client here is a lawyer, and another is, and his wife is a civil servant. And they sent us a rather lovely picture in the first stage of the pandemic this time last year of them reusing this space instead of just having a lovely coffee pot and a breakfast table. They ended up using it as their designated home office. So I think it's being able to, you can never predict how spaces are going to be used, but you can assume that at some point in their life they will not be used for how they are designed. So how do you ensure that they have a level of generosity and adaptability to when those pressures are placed on them? And then this is a bit more about some of the work we've been doing to date, which is looking at, again, that adapt and adapt again approach to existing properties. And this is a slightly this is actually just around the corner from the office. So we've been looking at two projects, one up here, but the one I'm just going to touch on is this one down in the corner, which is for a journalist. And you can see these are super dense, small 2-story terrace homes that were built in the late 1800s. Again, all brick, all timber. And she got a small kitchen extension already. And because this space is so small that she's been working off a dining table while her children are kind of running around. So the key thing here is actually just looking at how do you fit in this new part of the brief that people are obviously spending more time in their home, and it's becoming much more work focused, and that's something that's definitely going to persist in the UK. So what she's looking at doing at the moment is, and these are very just initial sketches, looking at teasing out a moment in the existing property just for a workstation. And so the first is to see, well, could you accommodate something like that as a piece of furniture in one of the existing formal rooms, or could you reconfigure an upstairs room to accommodate a small additional space, or could you create a small outbuilding, which is something we've been looking at a couple of projects, and the outbuilding immediately takes pressure off the existing main house, and the outbuildings kind of, there's something nice about those connecting to the idea of the terrace house and how it evolved, because they used to have more, bathrooms outside initially before they got brought in. So actually kind of using the garden to take that pressure feels that it becomes part of that evolution and almost going full circle of the terrace house. And then the final project is a project that's just started on site, which is a very grand terrace house, 3 floors, flat access. And it's for a family of 4, but it's a relatively narrow plot of 5 meters, so not as grand as the one in Dulwich. And the key consideration here was always about the rear. And this is the project that we've been looking at doing at the rear, which currently they have a very, very small kitchen, under here, and very poor access to the garden. So we've been looking at creating a new kitchen dining space, but the key part is strengthening the connection to the garden. And again, looking at very sustainable materials that we're bringing in. So the whole extension here will be made out of timber, the structure, and then it's all sprayed with a cork render. And wood fiber insulation. So wood fiber is something that I don't know whether you have it over in China or Korea, but it's effectively an insulation that is made from waste from the timber industry, so sawdust and things like that. So and then the floor is completely upgraded with a new wood fiber insulation as well. And so this is then this kind of space that angles its way and shuffles its way to make sure that the garden isn't all eaten up by creating one big space, but within its plan, it has zones which has a window seat over here. It has the main body of the kitchen, and then it has a dining space or a play space over here. But what it does by putting the dining space here, it takes the dining space out of an existing part of the house and frees that up to become something like a playroom, like an office, and it allows other spaces to kind of take on those dual functions. But I think it's especially designing in a city where space is a premium. It's always about making sure that the space is working as hard as possible, and we find that ultimately, you're especially with a terrace house, your plan is quite defined in how much you can do. So it's always about that volume. Where can you push the volume and get that feeling of generosity in the volume? And how do those volumes start to connect to other parts of the house to create a cohesive whole is a key consideration. So with this, the space over the dining, we've been able to kind of push up that ceiling and make this feel like a very generous, whereas underneath the kitchen where there's a floor above you, you kind of have that suppression. So you at least get to feel the distinction and the differences as well that you sort of celebrate between the two. And then that is it. So it wasn't an hour, and I probably talked far too quickly. But I hope it was interesting.
Yes, it was really interesting. I have actually a class running separately apart from this lecture series called Living Design Studio. And that actually is aiming for students to make actually models to compare, all the materials and all these visual connections using your hand and not just, SketchUp model. Making physical models and actually testing the colors or materials on it. So it was really helpful. I actually used a couple of photos of your models already, like in the very beginning of the semester anyways, and shared with students. But I can see there are much more references that we can look into in your lecture today. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, it's always frustrating when you finish a project and then it takes a while to get it photographed. So there's 2 projects that we're waiting to get photographed, which are part of this terrace house evolution idea as well. So it's a pity I wasn't able to show those today, but you will no doubt see them sometime in June or July.
You finished your lecture in 30 minutes.
Yeah, you know what I'm like. I like to be efficient. Well, it's late there, isn't it? You want to all sort of enjoy your dinner.
Thank you. Thank you very much.